Welcome to Myth Madness. Over the last 5 episodes, I covered parts of the Garshaspnama, a Persian epic poem composed around 1066 AD. The Garshaspnama is all about the Persian hero Garshasp. He goes on many adventures, he kills a dragon, explores India, travels to the west, and meets a princess who he marries. At the end of the previous episode, Garshasp finally returned home to Sistan after many years of adventuring. His wife missed him, and he was ready to settle down. This episode will cover the last part of the Garshaspnama. The hero will come out of retirement to go on one final quest. Not long after returning to Sistan, Garshasp's father Athrat fell ill. At the grand old age of 285, he died. Garshasp succeeded his father, and became the ruler of Sistan in his place. In the Garshaspnama, Garshasp and his wife never had their own children, but the same year as Athrat's death, Garshasp's brother, Gurrang, had a son named Nariman. Sadly, Gurrang also died, and Nariman never knew his father. Garshasp and his wife loved the boy more than anything, and decided to raise Nariman themselves. Garshasp taught the boy how to hold a bow, and how to behave at feasts. He taught him to hunt, play polo, and be a warrior. By the time Nariman was an adult, he would have the strength of 100 men. Over the years, a lot had changed in Sistan, but beyond the kingdom's borders, the world was also changing. Garshasp's overlord was Zahhak, and Zahhak's dark reign over the earth had lasted 1,000 years. But, as I talked about in the Zahhak episode, a new hero finally arrived on the scene. This was Fereydun. He rose up in rebellion against Zahhak. He split Zahhak's head with a club, bound him, and imprisoned him in one of the caves of Mount Damavand. Fereydun freed the world from its serpentine tyrant and became king of the world in his place. Fereydun chose as his capital a place called Amol, a city in the north of Iran, on the southern coast of the Caspian Sea. Fereydun organized a fabulous feast. He sent his allies throughout the land to build support. He asked his close ally Kaveh to travel to a place called Kavar, which may have been in the east or the west, it's not clear. Fereydun also sent a letter to Garshasp in Sistan. The letter praised Garshasp. It detailed Zahhak's evil injustices and told how Fereydun defeated him. Fereydun wished Garshasp would go to China, and like Kaveh, build support for the new king there. However, first, Garshasp was invited, along with his nephew Nariman, to meet Fereydun in the capital. Nariman was excited to hear the news, and soon both father and adopted son and 12,000 chosen warriors marched to meet Fereydun at his palace. When they finally met the new king of the world, Fereydun welcomed them, but he asked Garshasp why he had not come sooner. Garshasp blamed his old age, which had bent his back and grayed his hair, and thus made traveling difficult. This wasn't exactly true, and the new young king pointed out that Garshasp was still stronger than 100 young men put together. Fereydun asked for a demonstration of the hero's famed strength. Garshasp was amused, and said standing in the presence of the king's far, his divine splendor, had renewed Garshasp's strength. And then he went to the heavy throne, picked it up, and spun it around, all while the king was still seated atop it. The king was overjoyed. He entertained Garshasp and the men of Sistan for several days, and then summoned him to officially give the hero his task. Cross beyond the Amu Darya River, the Oxus River, and do not rest. Go with your army through the land of Turan. You must collect tribute from the Kagan there and the Fagfur in China. If either of them refuse my command, bring them to court with his neck tied. Kagan and Fagfur here are essentially titles for the two powerful rulers living to the east of Iran. The Kagan here is the ruler of the land of Turan, or Turan, which is the area of Central Asia northeast of Iran. Fagfur is the name the Persians had for the emperor of China. Since Fereydun is a new king of the world, he is sending Garshasp east to make sure that both these men recognize Fereydun as their overlord, and aren't going to take advantage of Zahhak's downfall to go completely independent. Leaving Fereydun's palace in Amol, Garshasp and Neriman led their army through the lands of Central Asia, receiving gifts and tribute as they went. Everywhere he went, Garshasp brought the well wishes of Fereydun and told the people the world was free of Zahhak's cruelty. After crossing the Oxus River, the Persians found themselves in the lands of the Khagan Toghuz. He was a powerful man and looked after his people. Many warriors who served the Khagan went around on foot, carrying shields and bows in their hands, and asked if people needed help. Anyone who suffered injustice could report it to the king, and he would quickly help them. He lived in a bejeweled palace. It had 31 gates and a garden in front of each gate. The palace had 200 domed sandalwood roofs, all standing atop gold and silver pillars. Garshasp wrote the Khagan a letter, telling him to promise Fereydun tribute or prepare for war. Garshasp's secretary jazzed the message up a bit, saying the creator had ended the rule of the impure Zahhak and given kingship to the radiant Fereydun instead. He complimented the Khagan's kingdom and asked him to support their travels to the Emperor of China. When he read the letter, the Khagan asked the ambassador about Fereydun. He was told Fereydun's way is the religion of Geomart. He has the ancestry and strength of Tamaraz. His justice is so great that an old fox will give birth to a cub so a lion can give it milk, whatever that means. The Khagan was pleased to hear this and wished to ally with Fereydun. However, he said he wanted to think it over and told the ambassador he should remain at the palace for a week before he got a final answer. Let's back up a moment. As it happened, the Khagan had a brother who was known for his strength. Years before, the two of them struggled for the crown, and the Khagan's brother was eventually killed. But this brother had a son, Tegantash, and he grew up to be a proud warrior and often argued with his uncle, the Khagan Toghuz. Fighting and war occasionally broke out between the two, and oh so conveniently, the same week Garshasp arrived, it looked like it was going to happen all over again. The Khagan deliberated with his counselors on what to do. Eventually, they pointed out that the Khagan's father, and even the Fagfur of China, had once paid tribute to Zahhak. Fereydun was like Zahhak in education and splendor, but greater in justice, ancestry, and character. In short, they considered Fereydun an improvement, so it would be best to side with him, and also not have to fight a war with his fearsome general, Garshasp. So the Khagan invited Garshasp to a feast. He gave him tribute and gifts to take back to Fereydun and complimented Garshasp on his heroic reputation. In the middle of the feast, a messenger entered and reported that Tegantash had assembled an army and was headed this way. Garshasp asked what was wrong, and the Khagan explained the issue with his nephew. In this way, Garshasp, Neriman, and the Iranians were sucked in to help battle against Tegantash. The two armies came together at the foot of a hillside. Neriman led the Iranians, and the Khagan and Garshasp watched from afar as Neriman rode around and unsaddled enemies from their horses. For every Turanian Neriman threw to the ground, Garshasp and the Khagan drank a cup of wine in joy. But then the Khagan spied Tegantash rush down the opposite hillside, riding a white horse with a lance in his hand. The Khagan grew timid, and he pointed out his nephew to Garshasp. Garshasp saw that the man was riding towards his own nephew, so he let out a yell telling Neriman to be alert. Neriman and Tegantash circled each other like wild lions. They fought with bows, then lassos, their helmets were shattered, their tunics ripped, their swords swung, their armor turned to dust. Neriman turned his horse and tempted Tegantash to follow him. Then he threw his lasso, roped him around the waist, and pulled Tegantash to the ground. With the fall of their ruler, the enemy army disintegrated. The Iranians let out a cry to heaven, chased them to the ridge of the mountains, and took many prisoners. Neriman delivered the captured Tegantash to the Khagan, who then took his nephew to a secret place to be executed. For their support in fighting his enemy, the Khagan gave the Iranians many gifts from his treasury. Garshasp sent a letter to Fereydun, informing him of their triumph on the battlefield and the nobleness of the Khagan of Turan. After leaving the Khagan, the Iranians set out for China. They soon arrived at a vast desert, inhabited by goblins, demons, and snakes. They passed a salt spring with water white like milk. When thirsty animals approached this spring, the water itself sprang up like a snarling lion and devoured the animal. Bare bones lay all around the spring, marking its past victims. The Iranians had no explanation for this strange, evil water, and they rode on. They stopped at a city called Sagir, pitched their tents outside, and hunted wild donkeys that lived nearby. Garshasp saw a woman jump down from a tree with a baby at her breast and then run away as fast as a gazelle. The locals told him she was a special creature, and the trees all around were filled with more like her. They had faces like people, but they walked like gazelles. They had claws like demons, and they ran away from humans and died if caught in traps. The king of Sagir told Garshasp that he was just a humble vassal of the Emperor of China, and that Garshasp should go from city to city and demand tribute for Fereydun. So Garshasp assigned this task to Neriman, and gave him command of half of the Iranian army. Neriman left the following morning. A week passed, and Neriman arrived at some mountains with a narrow path between them. The path was very dangerous. If a single soldier let out a scream, a rain of stones would fall down on all sides and crush the entire army. But they all moved silently, and eventually came to a river. A man lived there whose body was white and black like a snow leopard, and who had 3 eyes in the middle of his forehead. He had tusks like a boar and claws like a lion. Neriman quickly killed this man, who was a demon. Then they came to a city full of treasure. The Iranians fought the king of this place and defeated him. But then, on the cusp of their victory, the city collapsed into dust. Meanwhile, on the same day Neriman left Sagir to go on his side quest, Garshasp had his secretary write a letter to the Fagfur of China, telling him to provide the tribute and taxes due to Fereydun, or Garshasp would come and crown himself Emperor of China. When the Fagfur got the message, he was not happy. He told the messenger, "I hold power from China to the Oxus River, an area greater than any kingdom. In battle I have cut off a dragon's head. Only the Creator is more powerful than I. Everyone else is smaller than me. I sent my son to prepare the army. When he returns, we'll conquer Persia and devastate that whole country all the way to Rum." The messenger returned to Garshasp to tell him the Fagfur planned war. The two sides fought a battle near a great city called Kamu. For all the Fagfur's tough talk, it was a complete victory for the Iranians. The Fagfur's son was killed, and after the battle the Iranians plundered the city. So many people were executed. All the palaces and temples were torn down, and the idols were smashed. Treasures were handed out to all the conquering warriors, and then they set fires throughout the city. When the Fagfur learned of the death of his son, he threw his crown from his head and fell to the ground. He mourned for a week, and then prepared for the next fight. He had a general named Kala, a man who had cast down many mighty warriors, and had no match in all of China. The Fagfur gave him command of an army, and then sent him to join another general named Jermos. Meanwhile, back at Kamu, Garshasp learned of these new war preparations. By now, Neriman had returned with the rest of the army. So Garshasp sent Neriman and his Sistani troops to face the new enemy. The next battle went on for 3 days, and was a whirlpool of blood. Neriman fought in the middle of it. He struck left and right. With every blow he fended off men. The boom from the crack of his club could be heard 2 miles away. Kala saw that a number of his men had fallen, so he rode his white horse towards Neriman, his sword flashing like lightning. But Neriman shot an arrow at Kala. It went through his helmet and fastened it to the top of his head. Kala fell from his saddle and landed in the dust. At the death of their leader, the army began to flee, and the Iranians fell on them, killing and capturing many. The other general, Jermos, galloped away alone through the woods. But as he was riding away, a tree branch protruded out in front of him. He hit it. It knocked him off his horse, and Jermos died hanging from the tree, unknown to anyone in his disintegrating army. While that was happening, Garshasp led a second group of Iranians in a battle against more Chinese. It raged without end for an entire week. This Chinese army contained a number of sorcerers. They used their magic to appear at the top of a mountain behind the Iranian army, released a large number of flying serpents, and caused strong snowstorms and bitter winds to rage. The locals saw all of this and worried the creator wanted the Iranians to be defeated. But Garshasp learned about the sorcerer's work. He sent some brave warriors to ambush them, cut off their heads, and so saved the land and his troops from the supernatural cold. Garshasp rode through the ranks of his army and motivated the men to keep fighting. Eventually, the enemy retreated. The Emperor of China now led his own army, and was surrounded by his entire entourage. He also traveled in style. His tents were decorated with a different carpet every day. Men arrived at his camp every day to deliver collected taxes and eat at his feasts. The Fagfur, the emperor, sat on a turquoise throne that was supported on the backs of 4 elephants. His head was covered by a luxurious canopy. High above him flew his standard displaying a white elephant with a head like a falcon. The standard was made of fine gold cloth. An oracle guided the Chinese army to a river and told the emperor that somewhere on the other side lurked the forces of Neriman and Garshasp. Meanwhile, Neriman readied his own troops. He told them not to light fires at night and to not make any sounds. The Fagfur of China wished to take rapid action against the Iranians and to go across the water and attack by night. He set his own ambush, not knowing his enemy had already set theirs. The Chinese found the Iranian camp quiet, seemingly fearless, and without a patrol. They attacked. But as soon as they moved, hidden armies surrounded them. The violence that night made the whole world seem like a dark hell. At dawn, a silver haze showed the grass had become red from all the blood. The rocks had become red from all the blood too. The emperor's oracle knew that defeat was coming. He told the Fagfur he would go to the top of the nearby mountain to gain more insight into the mysteries of heaven. But it was just an excuse. The oracle astrologer fled the battlefield, and the Fagfur never saw him again. At dawn, the 2 armies formed up and began to battle again. Neriman charged forward to attack the Emperor of China. He struck down 10 elephants and 3,000 horsemen on his way. He knocked down the Fagfur's standard with his lance. Soon, everyone disgracefully abandoned the Emperor of China and fled. The Iranians were free to capture the Emperor's fabulous tent. They captured his throne, his war equipment, and his herd of elephants. The Fagfur jumped off his own elephant and escaped on a horse. After the victory, Garshasp and Neriman set out in pursuit of the Fagfur. Every village, town, and castle they came to, they demolished. They mixed the dirt with shed blood and took many prisoners. Soon they came to the Emperor of China's capital. The residents there had prepared the city for a siege. They had gathered projectiles and hurled pots of boiling water over the walls. Stones fell from on high, and arrows were shot from below. Garshasp charged forward with his mace. He struck the city gate so violently the lock was shattered. He led his army inside and began to kill everyone. There was looting and fighting everywhere, and screaming voices begging for mercy. Bodies were thrown to the ground, and priests were struck down in front of their idols. This went on for 2 weeks. At that point, Garshasp listened to the cries of mercy and held back the army from more plunder and bloodshed. Neriman then led his own men to the emperor's palace. The soldiers let him in, and he made his way to the emperor's bedchamber and saw his harem of mistresses. Eventually, he found the emperor himself, praying in a temple, with his head bowed to the floor in front of a golden idol. Neriman walked in and pulled the man to his feet and said kind words to him. Neriman brought the emperor out into the middle of the city, where Garshasp waited with the Iranian troops. The Emperor of China was not killed, and his family were not harmed, but Garshasp loaded his treasures onto the backs of thousands of camels. Garshasp wrote a letter to Fereydun. He told the King of Kings that he had obliged every king beyond the Oxus River to pay tribute. However, the Fagfur was overcome by pride, refused, and the result was war. In the end, all of China was destroyed. 30,000 prisoners were taken, and 80 kings captured. Garshasp and Neriman set out to return to Iran. The Fagfur went with them. Garshasp did not bind the Fagfur in chains, as he didn't think it was appropriate to treat a royal man that way. He wondered if Fereydun would forgive the Fagfur and show mercy. Garshasp's letter reached Fereydun before the Iranian army, and he was very pleased to hear of their success. When they arrived, the citizens watched the Fagfur ride through the streets on his elephant, all the way to Fereydun's palace. He was lifted off his elephant, and a golden chain was put on his feet. But when the Fagfur came before the throne, Fereydun ignored him and gave him no reason to hope. Neriman went to the world's king and bowed before him. He told him about the campaign in China and about all the wonderful things he and his father and the other Persians had seen on their journey. Neriman reported on the Fagfur and told Fereydun that the Emperor of China was an honorable, worthy man, and that Fereydun should be magnanimous in victory. Fereydun ordered that the Fagfur be given a new clean robe and have his chain removed. He told Neriman to tell the Emperor of China that he had thrown away the bow during the time of Zahhak, but when Fereydun's time had come, he prepared for war, and so Fereydun had retaliated for that. But now Fereydun's message was, let this house be your house. Have good hope and keep calm. Later, at a feast held for the Emperor of China, the two kings embraced. Over the next few days, Fereydun drank many cups of wine with the Fagfur and pampered Neriman with gifts. In the end, Fereydun sent the emperor back to China to rule that distant land as Fereydun's loyal vassal. Now home and enjoying the fruits of victory, Neriman contemplated advice Garshasp had given him at the beginning of his adventure. His uncle had told him that if he returned home safely, he should find a wife. Fortunately for Neriman, Fereydun had a daughter. The king of the world agreed Neriman would marry his daughter, but he also wanted Neriman to settle in Sistan. While the king of nearby Kabul was aligned with Fereydun, he was also related to the wicked Zahhak. For that reason, Fereydun considered him a threat and wanted the king of Kabul watched. So Neriman and Fereydun's daughter were married, although the wedding is not covered in the Garshaspnama in any detail whatsoever. However, the poem does say that soon after the wedding, Fereydun's daughter became pregnant. The childbirth was difficult, and everyone grew worried. Fortunately, Garshasp had hired a skilled physician from India, and with his help, she gave birth to a boy. The baby looked just like his father, and Neriman named him Sam. The happy father sent 2 messengers, one to Fereydun and one to Garshasp, with the happy news, and a print of the baby's hand painted on silk. After traveling with Neriman to China, Garshasp's adventures in the Garshaspnama were still not over. He was now 700 years old, and yet Fereydun now wanted Garshasp dispatched to Tangiers to retrieve treasures from a rebellious king. So once again, Garshasp set out with an army of brave Persians, although what happens here is very reminiscent of Garshasp's earlier quests. When Garshasp arrived in Tangiers, he first fought against one of the rebel king's generals. However, this time, the Iranian army was at first defeated. One of Garshasp's nephews, not Neriman, was killed in the fighting. This enraged Garshasp, and he lashed out on all sides, eventually striking the Tangiers general dead and causing the enemy army to retreat. Night came, and the king of Tangiers fled the battlefield and returned to his capital city. He raised another army and prepared for another battle. However, it was a ruse. In the middle of the night, the king lowered a rope from the city wall and fled to sea with 2 men in a small boat. The king was later captured by the Iranians and executed. But in the morning, when the Tangiers army learned their king had fled, they threw themselves off the city walls, no longer daring to fight. After that, Garshasp praised the Creator and opened the treasury to rebuild Tangiers. He released his prisoners and settled numerous farmers throughout the land. He appointed a loyal member of the royal family as king and reinstituted the old system of taxes and tribute to Fereydun. Finally, he sent a letter to Fereydun telling the king all the good news. Garshasp decided to tour the country on his return journey. He was old, and he doubted he would have a chance to see these lands again. He saw strange multicolored trees, plants with large pods, and colorful birds. He came to a village surrounded by fabulous gardens. It also housed a fabulous temple, with a gate made of black onyx and a floor entirely composed of black lapis lazuli tiles. Strangely, the village itself was empty, so Garshasp asked the priest in the temple why everyone had left. He was told that nearby lived a monster in a large tree. It had 8 feet and 2 heads. It sprayed poison from its mouth, which makes it a description that sounds a lot like another dragon for Garshasp to fight. What's more, the sound of the monster's roar could tear a mountain in two. The priest said the creature emerged from the sea and emptied the village of people and animals. The priest had a scout that sat on top of the temple, and he watched the monster from afar and ran away when it appeared. When Garshasp heard their tale, he told them he would save them from this Ahriman that plagued them. Garshasp put on his tunic and dressed his elephant in armor and went to the nearby forest. He approached the spot where the monster was known to live, and Garshasp prayed to the Creator for strength. When he saw the beast, he stretched the string of his bow, notched an arrow, and fired. The wounded monster came forward full of anger and attacked Garshasp's elephant. It cut the elephant's trunk off with a swipe of its claws, and tore off its head with its jaws. Garshasp threw his lance at the monster's chest, grabbed his club, and jumped down from the box on the elephant's back. Garshasp hit the monster on the head. His blows were so strong, nearby trees were damaged, and so it was that he scattered the brains of the beast and sank up to his chest in its blood. Afterwards, Garshasp put his head to the ground and praised the Creator. Like what he did when he slayed a dragon when he was a young man, he had the monster's skin stuffed with straw and tied to the back of an elephant in his army's caravan. After continuing on through a desert, Garshasp and the Iranians came to a high, well-fortified stone fortress. What follows is an episode very similar to one of Garshasp's adventures in India. The only way up to the fortress was by a stone staircase. At the top, this gate was guarded by 2 mechanical creations, a wooden man who shot arrows, and a large copper lion that breathed fire. Garshasp shot the man from afar and passed the lion. Within the fortress stood a golden throne, and on the throne sat a dried-out corpse that had obviously been there for a long time, and would scream whenever someone approached it. Like in Garshasp's earlier adventures, this corpse was the remains of a legendary person. In this case, the poem says that it was the Abrahamic prophet Enoch. In past adventures like this, Garshasp received some kind of special knowledge. However, this time, Garshasp left empty-handed and continued on his way. When Garshasp reached Fereydun's palace, he sat with the king and told him about his journey. He brought out the stuffed skin of the monster he killed and showed it to the king. Then he brought out the treasures of Tangiers, but Fereydun accepted none of it. He told Garshasp to keep the treasures, and also gave Garshasp some of his own treasures. The journey to Tangiers had already lasted 5 years, and when Garshasp returned to the king, there were 2 letters that soon arrived. They were addressed to Garshasp and Fereydun, and they were from Neriman, and when Garshasp read his eyes filled with tears. Fereydun saw this, and recognizing Garshasp wanted to return home, he told the old hero to prepare to leave for Sistan at once. When Garshasp finally arrived at home, he was welcomed by Neriman and his young grandson Sam. After that, Garshasp lived with a happy heart. He taught Sam hunting and horsemanship, and when he turned 14, Garshasp allowed him to join battles. One day, when Garshasp was 733 years old, he was out hunting and fell ill. He knew his time had come and called all his loved ones to him. He gave them all sorts of advice on how to live, and he named Neriman as his successor. They all cried together, and finally the family left Neriman alone with Garshasp. Garshasp gave his heir additional advice and explained what he wanted done with his body. After 10 days, Garshasp finally succumbed to his illness and died. Everyone's heart became troubled, and mourning filled every house. They buried Garshasp in a pavilion with his weapons, armor, and standard. When Fereydun heard about Garshasp's death, he was upset. O hero, O warrior, O leader, you lion, you world conqueror, you famous man, who will now take up your club and your sword? Now that your bold arm is idle, who is now fighting battles for me in every country? Since now the fight is over for you. And that's the end of my retelling of the Garshaspnama. This retelling took 6 episodes, and creating them was a long, exhaustive process. As I mentioned at the beginning, I mostly relied on French and German translations of the poem, because as far as I know, it's not available in English. And as far as I can tell, these episodes represent the most complete retelling of the Garshasnama in English that's ever been done, which I'm really proud about. I chose to spend so much of my time on Garshasp since he was undoubtedly an important hero in the days of the ancient Iranians 3,000 years ago, as I discussed in the episode on Garshasp and the dragon. But for some reason, he does not appear much, or at all really, in the extensive Shahnameh epic poem. Hopefully, these episodes gave you an appreciation of a relatively unknown hero in the Western world, and also an appreciation of how a mythic tradition can undergo extensive modifications over time. As always, thank you for listening, and if you want to support the pod, right now the best way to do that is to get the word out. So please feel free to share these episodes with anyone you feel would be interested and spread them far and wide. In the next episode, I will continue with Persian mythology and go back to stories presented in the Shahnameh.